Taiwanese government should be making a unilateral decision on their part, that they will now decide to compromise all their interests, all their beliefs, and simply unilaterally impose their decisions on such a prickly regional issue. Because we think that this is something that is ultimately based on the sovereignty of Taiwan itself. And we think that this is something that needs to be considered from the perspective of the people and taking into account the very legitimate viewpoint of the people. Why is democracy particularly important for Taiwan? First of all, we think that Taiwan's political identity and how it distinguishes and defines itself in the world, particularly in the Asian region, is through this continued application of democracy and the three principles that was laid out by the father of modern China. We think that this is a very important part of Taiwan's ability to interact as a unique actor in the international space. No, thank you. But furthermore, we think that democracy is a platform of reconciliation and mitigation within domestic society. When you have issues that have such polarized opinions, such as independence, we don't want these huge divides in society. We don't want one side to unilaterally impose their role. I think any realize it.
So actually, there's assumption in your argument that the government, Chinese government, will coerce the Taiwan government to give up the democracy. Okay. Yeah.
No, we don't think that that's an assumption. If you live in Macau, we think that you would have seen those effects yourself, where they force them to pass things like the Article 23, so that they have absolutely no way of voicing a dissent against the government. We think that this is a tried and failed policy. No, thank you. So now let's talk about the international perception and the ripple effects across East Asia. We think that what Taiwan acts as in the international arena and the regional arena is that it's part of a counterweight towards China. Well, why? Because we think that ultimately the regional powers in the region don't want China to rise as this huge superpower that will get its way whenever it wants. We think that, especially when we see that there are so many conflicts between China and the regional powers in the region right now, such as between ASEAN regarding the disputes around the surrounding islands, we think that the regional, the countries in that region don't want China to pursue an expansionist agenda. And we think that, from a very subjective point of view, it's very irresponsible for the Taiwanese government to do this to other countries, to show them that even them are kowtowing to the needs of the Chinese Communist Party, and they're not putting up their fight anymore. Because we think that this is a concession to be in two ways. Because first of all, there's a first impression of this message as being a direct confirmation with the Chinese will, and we think that that sends a very clear message that it's a concession of defeat. But second of all, these other countries will also see that Taiwan has removed any sort of leverage it will have, whether it's economic or political, on that front. And that's why it's a further concession of defeat, and a further concession that China is the way to go. Now, from a very objective point of view, from a more liberal paradigm, we can counter with a good international relations, because we think that it's only the interaction of ideologies and ideas that ensures that there is no encroachment of power within the international arena, and that there are more checks and balances to be a better global society. Ladies and gentlemen, this side of the house is proud to announce.
Thank you, leader of opposition, and I'll invite the member of government.
This debate, what government side is going to prove to that how changing the attitude from Taiwan to China is actually the best approach for China right now, also for Taiwan right now. And why exactly this kind of purchasing of home independence has been happening for many years, this series and fruitless approach, and still it's time for us to really realize what's the meaning of this, and what's the cost, and what's the benefits going to happen if we abandon and if we do not have this kind of hostile attitude anymore towards China. So basically, for all the older government sides actually give us very clear explanation of what's the harms if Taiwan keep this attitude towards China, and what's exactly the idea, that's why this idea of being more cooperative with China is important in this debate. And because the government is trying to scale the way between the Taiwanese, what is the needs of the Taiwanese people, and how this changing attitude can actually bring more benefit and maximize the economic development inside Taiwan and also the neighboring country, and also why the consequence with changing the attitude is actually better than just keeping very hostile towards the inside status quo. So before I move on to my section, a few questions first over the opposite side. First of all, this is all about the cases actually saying that Taiwan will have to definitely keep doing this kind of hostile attitude, can keep pursuing the form of independence, and still they argue that this kind of economic cooperation is always existing in China, between China and Taiwan. So there's no reason for Taiwan to give more friendly attitude. But the problem is, if we keep the status quo, there's no way for us to maximize the economic development inside Taiwan. There's still a lot of restrictions, there's still a lot of regulation, there's still a lot of limits, because China is not going to give you full support, and especially it's not only about China, also about China allied countries, especially in Africa. You can see that among the 54 countries in Africa, actually 50 of the countries actually allies with China. And we never give any trade with Taiwan, not only if China, if Taiwan actually change the attitude and being granted the power by China. And also believe that how many is it fighting? Taiwan is already like, this is already the 100 year of Taiwan constitution. Taiwan is already still on the track of Taiwan's formal independence. But we can see no evidence that in the very near foreseeable future, Taiwan can actually achieve this independence. So what's the meaning of keep doing this kind of thing if you can only expect that the future is going to be fruitless and there's no way for you to really done that? Why you have to bring so many costs and risk so many things without necessary and reasonable achievement? No, thank you. And second rebuttal to the opposition side, because they kept mentioning that if we want to change the attitude, this means definitely means to reunification. But we did not see the case, even if we give the analogy of Hong Kong and Macau. But the problem is, Hong Kong and Macau is so much different than Taiwan. Hong Kong and Macau is actually the colonies of France and the British government. But Taiwan is actually an independent colony, is an independent island 100 years ago. And Taiwan even has its own government, even has its own military force, even has its own policy and security and identity. So how can you assume that once Taiwan actually changes the attitude towards China, they can actually be assaulted by China immediately? And why they are saying that this kind of democratic ideology will actually disappear in Taiwan immediately? That's no proof and no linkage. No thank you. First, extension. First of all, what is extending opposition trying to prove, trying to get from formal independence is already existing in Saskia. No thank you after the first argument. Firstly, what can you get from formal independence? We think that first thing is about sovereignty, second thing is about recognition, first is about national unity and national sentiment. But we see that under that, if we can actually change the attitudes towards China, these things can still be achieved without formal independence. Why? For sovereignty, we believe that Taiwan, with or without changing the attitudes towards China, still they have their own territory, they have their own government, they have their own military forces, they have their own economic development, they have their own fiscal policy, monetary policy, and things like that. This kind of sovereignty will never be invaded by China. Why? This is not only about China, Taiwan, etc., but still we have a lot of superficial organizations such as UN, such as other labor powerful forces in the West and the US American continent. That's why we believe that this kind of sovereignty is still guaranteed without Taiwan being formally independent. No, thank you. Second, recognition. We believe that if Taiwan actually changes attitudes towards China, still the recognition in UN and the position in UN can still be achieved. Because first of all, they still have the representative in UN right now, and still have the representative in many international organizations such as the Olympics Council. We believe that even if China and its allies not actually recognizing Taiwan publicly, but still many other countries and many other regions in the world is actually already recognizing Taiwan as a unique state, as a legal state, as an independent state. This kind of recognition is already existing implicitly in the statute. So we don't really have to necessarily make it into the constitution or make it into the law and make it into the United Nations saying Taiwan is already existing independent. And the first is about national unity and national sentiment. We believe that Taiwanese people already have this kind of power and can already share and enjoy this kind of national unity by being a Taiwanese, being proud of the country, by being proud of the state, without necessarily being independent. Because we believe that Taiwanese government has already got its own perspective, and it has already got its own nationality as being a Taiwanese people. And this kind of unity and sentiment will not be infringed if you are showing more friendly attitude towards China, because the opposition side cannot prove any evidence to say that if once Taiwan is actually forbidding this kind of hostile attitude towards China, that's why they can also forbid their nationality, they can also forbid their own military, they can also forbid their own government. We don't see the sense of this thing. That's why we believe that these all three things about why you want to seek from formal independence is already existing without you being legally independent. What's the comment?
Yes. The representative of China is not only representing Taiwan individually, and there's huge mismatch interests in the area. Also, regarding one country systems, that was originally developed for Taiwan.
I believe that, first of all, the recognition and the representation in Taiwan is always significant enough in statute right now, and that's why we don't necessarily have to formal independence. And the second is about the focus on this space and how can we actually maximize the economic development inside Taiwan. And why we believe that by keep on forcing pursuing of formal independence is actually bad and detrimental for the development of the economy. Why? Because first of all, under this, if you actually cut this policy, it can also as an act to empower Taiwan. Because it's very good analysis from the open option side, saying that right now Taiwan is actually rely a large amount of all this power and resources from USA. But when you have changed the attitude towards China, you can also get the power granted by China, and you can actually enlarge the development of the economy in such a very significant amount of scale. And therefore, you can the trade with those African countries that I just mentioned a while ago, immediately because this kind of countries that are backing the trade with China, Taiwan right now, is because of the pressure of China. But one is China and Taiwan is actually showing more cooperative attitudes towards each other, and one Taiwan is actually been compromising. We believe that this compromisation is actually equals to power, because what we think right now is not necessarily the hostile attitudes. What we think right now is actually how to actually maximize the whole development inside Taiwan, and what's also benefit the Taiwan, China, and also US. Because right now, the comments between US and China is unnecessary because China, US actually supporting Taiwan, and also US actually also going fighting against China. But the problem is just because Taiwan is so battered and reliant, so dependent on USA, that's why they give no option for Taiwan's
think just because China is stronger and Taiwan fears Chinese potential threat and attack, Taiwan simply abandoning all means or moves toward former independence means submitting to a greater power. We think that you have your rights, you also have some values that you hold on to, you have your goals, and simply giving that up because somebody else who's stronger than you tells you to do so cannot be, should not be done. And we think that you actually are giving up your own identity and your own values just because a powerful actor tells you to do so. It's actually submission to such greater power. It actually strengthens those bullying the less powerful ones in an international domestic arena just because they're powerful, and strengthens those efforts. And we think that should not be allowed in our status quo. No, thank you. We also think that for Taiwan, it was an independent state. It has a different political system and also has it's working fine in the status quo. It actually has been doing pretty well, setting itself as a role model for other countries and even within the Chinese ethnic minorities to seek independence, because you yourself already is independent in some extent and still maintain good ties with China. You don't necessarily have to engage in violent conflict with China to seek independence, and China still respects you to a certain extent. And we think this model could actually be a very good viable model for other Chinese ethnic minorities and overcome these kind of domestic conflicts that exist within China. We also think that Taiwan also is very seeking independence. If you simply reunify and the independent aspirations still exist, it will also escalate into different kind of conflicts within China-Taiwan relationship, because people are now forcibly taken away their independence and their identity. And as a Korean who have experienced colonialization with Japan, I'm pretty sure that Taiwanese people will be very upset and shame on you, opening government, for resisting such things. And on the international level, Mr. Speaker, we also think that superpowers always bully the less powerful ones. We also think that if Taiwan gives up and submits to the greater power of China, that it will become a precedent that violence can do things, and violence actually brings successful results. And we think this will actually lead to undermining the efforts of others, such as Sudan or such as Chechen, such as Yugoslavia, like former Yugoslavian people, seeking their own independence which is rightfully theirs. We think that those Taiwan actually setting a good role model to resolve these kind of conflicts and giving it up suddenly will actually discourage these people from doing so, and also encourage the oppressive powers to become more oppressive and ignore the voices of aspiration of independence, Mr. Speaker. We think that it's pretty much positive to seek what is yours, and it's very negative you simply give up just because you face a powerful state. You shouldn't, we believe that they should do.
Thank the member of opposition, and I invite the government whip to close the government.
Only like these sentence on that. Taiwan if the Taiwan admits they're going to be part of the China say, we will admit you, we're going to allow you to have your own military troops. So that is a totally difference. We can also find between the Hong Kong and Macau case in, with Taiwan. Because Taiwan actually you can have more authority to decide on yourself, which actually give you some certain decisions to decide what kind of interest will benefit yourself. So what is the main argument actually we can get from the closing opposition is mainly about they still concerned is about some benefit, the interest of being framed after those unification, and also to give some international extension say and harm the Sudan case and harm other cases. But this is that is a totally different cases. As Alex told you, like from very beginning, the Taiwan is actually independent island. And I'm gonna elaborate more why we think nowadays, now the Taiwan development, why the economic development is that important to Taiwan, and why the Taiwanese should also consider their economic development, and maybe they should consider to some extent. Yes, please.
Every project is Chinese silver lining. What's happening in Hong Kong and Macau now is just a severely compromised democracy and a global people. Do you seriously believe that China will let Taiwan have its own military and its own democracy?
Yes, I think they will, because that is also the claim, because military is there. You cannot say, oh, just totally abolish your military. So you cannot just use the Taiwan, Macau and Hong Kong analogy to analyze the Taiwan case. Now I'm going to move to today's main clash is about whether the formal independence is the best way for Taiwan future development. Because as the closing government, we firmly believe that we should stick to the one China, two system policy. Okay, first of all, actually, as the whole banks gave us a meaning from the opening opposition about why Taiwan deserves independence, because they talk about from the principle level, say there's some self-identity, and also we need some international recognition from the whole international community, and why sovereignty is that important. But ladies and gentlemen, as Alex told you, all of these things that's already got from this status quo, say from some implicit international recognition. So I think the status quo say if you can get some positions in the international community, like the United Nations, and also like in the Olympic Games. So I think all of the implicit recognitions is the kind of things to support those goals or aims proposed by the opposition side last time. And second thing, they still argue and consider about imbalanced power, or about say if we may not have the Taiwan, if we adopt our policy, actually there's going to be no one representing Taiwan, there's going to be no one to voice on behalf of Taiwan. But ladies and gentlemen, we think that is the only thing
power. Mr. Speaker, they have a very false depiction or contextualization of the status quo. And we on closing opposition will claim to clarify this debate as the last speaker of this entire debate. So first, about this idea of independence. Mr. Speaker, the closing opposition believes independence is not a lack of discrimination, but independence is giving a granted right for you to have an autonomous power and voice in the international community. It's not simply a lack of conflict. Now, they tell us that according to their system, that they'll have one China with two systems. The fact of the matter